Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is Wednesday, February 27th. We're filming in the basement or the main floor of the beautiful Memorial Arena on Blanchard Street in Victoria. I want to thank our volunteer staff people, volunteer camera people, and the Shaw staff who make this all possible. The first segment of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack Show. Hello, Walter.
Good afternoon, Jack.
And I'm going to start off with something that came out within the last couple of weeks. It's from our three independent MLAs here in BC, Bob Simpson, Vicky Huntington, and John Van Dongen. There's actually one more independent out there somewhere, I think. And they've put forward a democratic reform agenda, which I think has a lot of good stuff in it. The first part is called election reform, and a couple of the things in it are campaign finance reform. And people are probably yawning and thinking, campaign finance reform, can you be any more boring? But, you know, really this is extremely important because BC has some of the laxest rules, I would say, of any what pretends to be a democratic province or state or nation anywhere in the world. Basically, here in BC, anyone, it says, from anywhere in the world can donate to a political party or a politician. And that doesn't sound right.
Isn't that not the same in other provinces, though?
No. In provinces like Quebec and Manitoba, and I'm sure every other province is better than this, but it's extremely restricted. Corporations can't donate, unions can't donate, and individuals are capped at a very low level. So you've got to get money. The public puts in some money, but who should be funding? Would we rather have us citizens funding the political parties, or do we want bagmen from foreign corporations anywhere in the world to be giving our politicians and political parties money and saying, hey, let's have a liquid natural gas strategy?
Is there any limit to how much a foreign corporation can give the government or a political party?
I don't know if there is. But anyways, what they say is ban, this is our three independent MLAs, ban corporate and union donations and allow only BC residents to donate to political parties and candidates. They also say Elections BC oversight of who becomes the leader of our political parties. Because in our system, again, we're amongst the worst in the world. In Canada, the party leader, especially if they become the premier or prime minister, has virtually unlimited power. So what they're saying here is, let's have Elections BC or some independent body oversee the way the leaders are chosen. Because I can guarantee you from personal sight that the way it's run by the Liberals and the NDP here in British Columbia, and I'm sure the main parties in any province in the country and federally as well, these are people who play to win. And they will do anything to win, the people who run our political parties. And allowing them free rein with no oversight is a big, big mistake for us. Because what we want is a fair and honest process that will bring forward a fair and honest leadership. If you let anybody just do what they want, then who's going to start winning? And that's a big problem for us. There's more, but if you Google, at least I found this on Bob Simpson's website. I recommend Google it and you'll see a lot of information. Walter.
Well, Jack, I just want to comment that these people will, I hope they get reelected. I hope they're running. And I hope a lot more independents run in this next election and upcoming elections, because the only solution, I think, is to get power away from the premier. It's terribly lopsided.
You know, I just want to follow up on that.
Yeah.
I don't trust the political parties anymore. There's some good people in them, but the power is concentrated at the top. Vote, that's a good idea. Let's vote for independence.
Let's have more independence. So, I mean, all these stories are related, aren't they? But I've come back probably with the same stories, but slightly new nuance every week. But this week, I've been following the story, the saga of the Auditor General, and how the NDP and the Liberals are now, it appears, they're really collaborating to get rid of the Auditor
Let's
General.
just run through the story very quickly to set the scene. The Auditor General is John Doyle.
Well, let me talk about the other two stories first, so we know what the three things that I'm going to be talking about. They are all related. Number two, the story that broke last week was the how PowerX BC Hydro was found guilty, collaborating with Enron to fix prices in the United States and the California energy market. They're found guilty in California courts, and the response here in BC. And of course, I've been following, trying to find out basically how the Chief Medical Health Officer got his job here in British Columbia, and it's an interesting sort of trail. So back to the first thing that I've been really preoccupied with for the last several weeks is watching how the Liberals have fired the Auditor General, and now John Horgan has stood up in the House and is badgering the Liberals now to replace him. Now this seems very strange, given that his tenure is not over till the summertime, and if the NDP become the government, they have plenty of time to appoint their own Auditor General, and one would think that they would afford themselves of that luxury of choosing their own Auditor General.
Well, one would hope that because John Doyle was excellent, and they've gotten rid of him.
That's right.
And what we need is somebody just as excellent.
Exactly.
Because it's an important position. And you know what? The politicians should be the last people who are picking the Auditor General. There should be an independent, completely independent group of citizens.
Exactly.
These are the people, this is the guy who watches over the politicians. For the politicians to be able to pick him is crazy.
Well, this is the prime example of it. Why is the John Horgan and the NDP badgering the Liberals to choose the new Auditor General, which they will have to live with for the next several years? Basically, the Auditor General has made the Liberals' lives pretty tough in the last several years. And so we know that that position could make any politician squirm. But why are the NDP badgering their arch enemies, the Liberals, to appoint the one man that can make their lives miserable for the next several years? Obviously, there's something up here, and I think there's a collaboration between the Liberals and the NDP to get rid of Doyle, to bury the BC rail scandal, and keep it buried until the NDP become government, and then the NDP will just nicely forget about ever bringing that scandal up, and they will have a nice easy ride for the next several years with a lapdog Auditor General.
Now, I just want to say that, you know, people who I respect, who follow politics, their point of view is that there's no doubt that the Liberals and the NDP work together on a lot of issues that benefit them but don't necessarily benefit us. And one good example was right after, I think, the last election, when the two parties, it turned out, had agreed to raise their own salaries.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a huge scandal at the time. It died out. But, you know, they do work together.
Well, it's like the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States. I mean, you have that situation. Now, I've published an article on the Canada Citizens News Network. It's online, and it backs up this story. And there's been a fair amount of research I put into this, and all the evidence does point towards a collaboration. And if we as citizens of this province should try to stop the Liberals from appointing an Auditor General. They don't have to do it right now. And if we can stop them from appointing that Auditor General, I think it would be a great victory for us.
Then make sure that the person who is appointed is great, because we have lost a great one. And you know, this province really owes a great debt of thanks to John Doyle, because from years ago, the first I ever heard of him, he was doing great work. A lot of it was never publicized. I mean, the stuff he came up with was absolutely shocking. A lot of it was downplayed by the media because he was showing the truth of the way power works in this province. And it's not power from the people, it's power from the corporations, and they seem to control our politicians, and everything works in their favor. And Doyle pointed that out. Now he's gone.
Well, and this is a sad part of it, is the media is not doing their job. That's why people like John Doyle are so important now.
I'm going to disagree with you there. The media are doing their job. Unfortunately, their job is making sure we don't know what's going on, because, I mean, you have to get back to that primarily important fact. who owns the media? It's not us, folks. We do not own the media, so the media doesn't work for us. The media is owned by corporate Canada, virtually all of it, and it works for corporate Canada. And if we don't face up to that singularly important fact and deal with it, then, I mean, we seem to be circling the drain in many ways these days, and it's not going to get better until we have a free press, because you can't have a democracy without a free press.
Well, you could have a wonderful program like you have, Jack, to be able to air these issues. Now, the other story I was covering is the PowerX BC Hydro Enron story. And
okay. PowerX was a...
PowerX is the export wing of BC Hydro. They export power for BC Hydro.
Do they still, or are they gone?
They still do it. Yes, they still do.
And Enron was the one, I mean, it used to be the biggest scandal in the history of the United States, a business scandal. Of course, it's been overtaken many times now in the past few years as the scandals grow.
Well, it's hard to remember, it's hard to follow them all, but this one's pretty
simple.
One. Back in 2000, 2001, Enron manipulated the electrical energy market by creating false shortages of electricity and drove up prices astronomically.
Especially in California.
In California, drove up prices thousands of times higher than the regular prices. So they completely were gouging the California citizens and the California government. Anyway, they were found guilty in court, in the California courts, of price manipulation and market.
And PowerX was.
PowerX.
Yes. And this was very recent. Very recent.
Very recently. This just happened last week. Now, what's peculiar is that Rich Coleman and John Horgan teaming up again, saying they couldn't find any evidence any wrongdoing. Well, go online, read the court documents, read the case. They have thousands and thousands of documents to show how guilty Enron is.
And how about PowerX?
Well, PowerX, of course.
Okay. So once
BC
again,
Hydro.
PowerX was working, they say, with Enron to manipulate and artificially raise energy prices in California and other places in order to sell it at a high profit.
Well, the money that's involved here is $280 million, but it could go up even higher, up to $1 billion or more dollars that is owed to the California government for price gouging. The thing is, you have to remember, is that if you look at all these associations, you realize that Enron, who was basically an invention of an accounting firm called Arthur Andersen and Associates, who helped create this company that could manipulate markets like this. Just before Enron, fell apart and all the accountants ran away with hundreds of millions of dollars, and the mums and the pops lost their life savings. Arthur Andersen Associates split into two different companies. One was Arthur Andersen Associates, and the other company was named Accenture. Now, Accenture soon after came to British Columbia, took over the operations of BC Hydro.
Not took over. It was given by the provincial government.
By the provincial government.
Yeah, by the Liberals, I guess.
That's right.
So,
and they started, sorry,
so
go ahead.
Once again, and Arthur Andersen, I think, was collapsed by the U.S. government, wasn't it? Just the entire Arthur Andersen corporation kind of dissolved?
No, they're still in existence, okay. I believe.
Okay. So
now, they took the rap for the Enron thing. Accenture didn't. So, and one could be forgiven, by the way. Accenture insists that they're not Arthur Andersen Associates, and that was all the other guys. But what's peculiar, Jack, is that Accenture came to BC. They took over the BC Hydro.
Given some control of BC Hydro by the provincial government.
Well, they run BC Hydro, and they employed the exact same bookkeeping strategies that Enron was using. And this is well known, a well-known and very respected economist by the name of Eric Anderson, no relation, did a review of BC Hydro's books and said BC Hydro is basically, if not in bankruptcy, going into bankruptcy because of this type of bookkeeping strategy. So this is so incestuous, these relationships between these same people. And by the way, with the same politicians and the same political parties, they're all in on it together. And we're probably going to get in trouble for saying this today because it's the truth, Jack. This is the truth, and the NDP and the Liberals want to cover it up just the same way as they want to cover up all the other scandals, the BC rail scandal and all the rest. So you know, what's so darn important is that we point this out. And this is not acceptable for us as British Columbians. Nobody asked for this. You know, people in California probably think, you know, we're a bunch of scoundrels up here for doing this.
And really all we are is people trying to get by in our daily lives, but the people running the show for us don't seem to be working on our behalf
Exactly.
at all.
There's lots more to that story. Hopefully we'll have an article up
Let's move on to
our
Dr.
news
Kendall.
network to back that up. The other thing that I've been following is how the Ministry of Health is operating and how they appoint the Chief Medical Health Officer.
Now, the Chief Medical Health Officer is, it's a very powerful and important position. I think this is the person who is supposed to be looking after the health of the people of British Columbia, right?
That one would think so. Now, he's appointed in the same way as the Auditor General by the Cabinet. But we know that the Cabinet of the Liberal government in this case had Liberal MLAs sitting on a committee that worked on choosing in the Auditor General. So I was wondering, how is it they chose the Chief Medical Health Officer? Because he refuses to acknowledge some blatant facts of reality, particularly the type of radiation that's being emitted from smart meters and cell phones is harmful. He refused to acknowledge, even his predecessor, he came from Toronto, he's a Chief Medical Health Officer in Toronto. His predecessor was calling for, and did set up guidelines in the city of Toronto for exposure standards 100 times stricter than Health Canada's, by the way. He refused to acknowledge that there's any evidence of whatsoever that supports that. So I'm wondering, well, he's obviously representing the views of the Ministry of Health. There's some very important people in the Ministry of Health. So I wanted to try to find out, who are these people? So the first thing I thought of was, well, let's look at who hired him. How did he get hired? Who reviewed his resume? And so today I was on the phone and emailing and back and forthing with the Ministry of Health, and it came down to, after they did admit there was a committee, that was hard to pry out of them, that if I wanted to find out who was on that committee, I'd have to go through the Freedom of Information Act, which I did. I submitted a request today, and we're going to follow that story and try to figure out who hired the Chief Medical Health Officer, and I think we're going to get to the nub of this issue.
And I mean, that should just be public information. You shouldn't have to work hard to find out.
No, we shouldn't, and they obviously, they'll do 3 hours of research, so-called, for you, but that drains away quite quickly. And this is the whole problem with the Freedom of Information Act itself, and is that what in the past was deemed to be public information, and a very small portion of the goings-on in government was deemed to be secret or private. With the act, they flipped that right around, Jack. Now everything is secret. All government, everything that government does that's important is secret, and if we want to find out anything important, we have to go through this act. So I mean, it's...
Who brought in the Freedom of Information Act?
That was way back in the day. I remember it was back in about 1985 or so.
Provincially, okay.
Provincial government and all that. But the thing is that these things should be more easily found out. And
well, it's public information. Everything that people have to go through the Freedom of Information Act to find out about. How dare these politicians hide anything from us?
Yeah.
I mean, we, the citizens, are supposed to be the boss of this country. Yeah. And it shows how pathetic we've become when we can't even get important, like Stephen Harper. It hasn't been mentioned much in the media this month, but there seems to be some major clampdown by Harper on scientists, Canadian scientists, speaking to the Canadian public. Well, I want to know about genetically engineered foods. I want to know what's happening with the salmon fishery. I want to know what's happening with the nuclear radiation from Japan because of those meltdowns, which nobody ever talks about. I want to know what's happening with the safety of our food.
How about the melting of the Arctic?
Yeah. And Harper tells us that our scientists can't tell us, and he gets away with it?
Seemingly he does. I mean, they went through this with Health Canada a few years ago also, when they were blowing the whistle on the bovine growth hormone, and a scientist wrote a book about I think he called it.
You know, the media always tells us that you can't get fired from the federal government because, but you can get fired from the federal government because I think his name was Dr. Shiv Chopra.
That's right.
And he was fired by the federal government for the, I guess, crime of trying to protect the health of the people of Canada against the interests of the corporations that run Health Canada.
Well, he was fired for doing his job, and all you have to do is do what's required to keep your job. Don't do what you were trained to do, and don't use the science that
Anyways,
backs
we've
up
got
your
about 1
position.
minute left, so I just want to mention what I think are like 5 of the most important stories in Canada or the world these days. One is the nuclear leaks in Washington State, a huge disaster for the world, no coverage. Another one, the secret pipeline that they're building across northern BC right now that is never talked about. They are building a pipeline across northern BC right now for the natural gas, not the oil, the gas, no mention. There's no deficit in British Columbia. The media will never tell us that. Corporations don't seem to pay taxes anymore. That never gets debated. And the people of Canada are talking about democracy. That's a huge story because people are talking about it more and more. Now, I would say none of those stories get much coverage, but the murder or killing by Oscar Pistorius of the young lady who was living with him, that dominates the news. So what's wrong with our media when they choose to give about 500 times as much coverage to that story as they give to the 5 that I've just mentioned? Is it by accident or is it deliberate? Walter, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Jack.
Thanks for watching the first segment of Citizens Forum.